Okay, everyone, thank you for being here for another episode of the show. Today we have Dave Young, who is the founder of Paragon Wealth Management, a registered investment advisor that focuses on building custom investment strategies for their clients. Paragon seeks to help their clients to build wealth and do it effectively. With that, welcome in, Dave.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I failed to mention as well, Dave is also the mayor of Orem, which is incredibly impressive. When did you take office there in that position?
It's been about 20 months ago.
20 months ago.
Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
We're just coming up on 2 years in January.
Great. Well, yeah, it's great. Very interesting. Well, Dave, the first thing I typically ask my guests is to talk a little bit about your upbringing. So what should people know about your childhood or teenage years? Anything influential that impacted you to be who you are today?
Yeah, I mean, I had a great childhood. My dad was in the military. He was in the Air Force. And so I always say I lived 12 places by the time I was 12 years old. And so some people might say, you're psychologically impaired, but I actually thought it was a big plus.
Yeah.
So we lived in Germany, Spain, Florida, Nebraska, Utah, just kind of all over the place.
Yeah, that's my dad was a news anchor, so not the same, but I was 7 states before 16. So no, I don't have you beat there, but can someone understand what that was like? So moved around quite a bit. Were there any lessons learned throughout those years, or anything that you saw your parents do, or that you did as a child or teenager that would say was impactful for you?
Yeah, I think my dad. He's still alive. He's 94, but he was the eternal optimist. He was never doubted he was going to make something happen. He just figured out how to make it happen. Even if it didn't work the first 3 times, he kept until he made it happen. So he had real tenacity and real optimism. My mom was more, she was the valedictorian of her high school. She always said she was the realist in the couple. And so I kind of had that mix of, the grounding of realism plus optimism kind of mixed together. And I think it had a pretty good impact.
Yeah, that's great. It's a good balance. So I saw and I read, Dave, that you went to BYU. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, tell us a little bit about that experience. What was your mindset going into school? And I always like to ask this question, especially for those who ended up starting their own businesses or entrepreneur ventures. Yeah, what was your thought process? Was it like, hey, I want to go get a good job? Or was it like, I want to go and be an entrepreneur after school? How did you approach going into BYU?
Going into BYU is kind of interesting. We lived in New Mexico at the time, in Roswell,
okay.
and I was planning on going to New Mexico State. That's where all my friends were going, and that was just the plan. And then my dad kind of got involved. He wanted me to go to BYU, and so he hit me up one day and he just said, "Hey, do you want me just to take care of your applications and help you out because you don't know what you're doing because you're a dumb kid, And I said, "Sure, that'd be great." So next thing I know, he's a few months later, he's like, "Well, I've got you a full scholarship to BYU, but New Mexico State, we didn't really get anything." I don't think he tried. And so you can go either place. You can go to BYU or you can go to New Mexico State, but you're paying for it, so you pick. And so that's how I wound up coming to BYU.
Yeah, it makes sense. And what did you end up studying?
I went into business with an emphasis in marketing.
Okay, cool.
So,
that's great. And what years was that you were there?
I was there from, I came in 74, did a 2-year mission in the middle, and then graduated in 79.
79. Okay, cool. Okay, and I saw here, Dave, that you had in your early career a few different ventures. It looks like Grand Illusion, the Diet Center franchise. So when you came out of BYU, what was kind of the first thing that you did?
Well, so as far as while I was going to school, I was running Grand Illusion,
okay,
which was the stage magic show.
Okay.
And it was actually a big show. We had 2 assistants, 2 dancers, a sound guy, a light guy, and we did several hundred shows all over the Western United States.
Wow. Did
a lot of colleges, did Reno, Tahoe, Vegas. For a while was on the same circuit with David Copperfield.
Wow.
And that was while I was at BYU. And I'm not sure exactly how I did that because we were traveling a lot and coming back and going back and forth. And it was kind of a wild life because, we'd be down in Vegas one weekend doing shows and people would be coming up getting autographs and, it was a big deal. And then, later that week, I'm back at BYU with my backpack, just walking around school, staying in some line with 15 other kids. And so it was a pretty good transition back and forth. But that went on. And then I graduated in 79, got married in 79. And then we had my wife and I had our first daughter. And then I kept doing the magic, and I'd be gone for a couple months at a time. And then finally I had to fly back for my daughter's 1-year-old birthday. And I'd been gone for 2 months, flew back, came in, was expecting a big welcome. She had no idea who I was. And so I thought, maybe we should look at this differently. And so that was kind of the end of the big magic. And at that point, I started looking at different business ventures. And I was always pretty entrepreneur-oriented. And so I was just always, as a kid, I was doing all kinds of things, mowing lawns and selling stuff door to door and all that. But anyway, so I decided to look into some diet center franchises. And I had a brother-in-law who was doing diet centers. And so I looked at them, and I wound up figuring out, at that time they were selling the franchises one at a time for about $5,000 just for the name, and then you brought everything else to it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I found a lady down in Nevada that had a franchise for selling. It happened to be the county, Washoe County, and so I bought it from her for $5,000, but I just gave her $500 and then made payments over a couple of years. And then I was able to take that franchise and split it into 4 because it was a county. And so Diet Center let me split it into 4. And then the values went up from $5,000 to $12,500 to $25,000. And so I was able to take one of them and sell it and take some of that capital and open up. And so basically I just kind of ping pong the diet centers like that. I had a business partner at the time, and we worked together. But yeah, ultimately we, over the course of the next few years, we wound up with about 10 franchises that we managed and sold and bought in different areas.
That's right.
Yeah. And so, and they were in Nevada, and they were also back in Illinois. We didn't do any in Utah because at the time, Utah was known as being in a permanent recession from a business standpoint. It was, you had Geneva Steel, Word Perfect, and you just really, it wasn't a dynamic economy in BYU. And so really anything except the basics you didn't do around here. And so I actually did open up a Mako Auto Painting franchise because I figured that was basic and people crash their cars, they need to get it fixed type thing. And Mako was inexpensive. And so, yeah, I did the Mako here. And then I had a friend that was doing a llama. He was buying and selling llamas. And so I helped him that back when llamas were kind of becoming a popular thing and going up in price. And I mainly did it because I spent a lot of time up in the mountains backpacking, and I wanted the llamas for backpacking. So
interesting.
Help with that. And we did a interior design store on State Street. I helped a buddy put that together and get that going. So it was just a bunch of random things.
Yeah, very diversified. I mean, so going back to the Grand Illusion stage show, the magic, what was your role there? Were you on stage? Were you performing magic? Were you overseeing the operational side? What was your role?
No, I did the magic.
You were doing the magic, so you were the guy.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that. What got you into magic?
I was, as a kid, I was always really curious about things, and magic intrigued me. And I'd seen some magicians, and I thought it was really cool. And so we lived in New Mexico at the time, and kind of in the middle of nowhere. It was Roswell, New Mexico. It was like 200 miles from anywhere. And we'd come up to Utah to see my grandparents in the summertime, and there was a magic show in downtown Salt Lake, Loftus Magic. And so I would get rides from Clearfield to downtown Salt Lake and go and hang out at this magic store all day and buy different books. And anyway, I just kind of taught myself, and and I started doing shows in clubs when I was in Roswell, but I was underage, which is kind of interesting looking back. But I did that, and then when I went on an LDS mission, that was pretty interesting because I was in Australia, and my mission president John Kelly hit me up. He was going to send me down to Tasmania. And he told me, the missionary works really hard in Tasmania, and it was. And people don't like the LDS people. They think, you're CIA agents. They throw rocks at you when you ride around on your bikes. And, as long as you don't break any rules, see what you can do to change it. And so I started, I got this idea to start doing magic shows down there. And back then we were just meeting in halls. We didn't have hardly any chapels down there. And so I'd have the members basically get one of their halls and put together like a family home evening magic show. And then they put posters all around the city or the town. And then I'd go into the different towns and I'd interview with the local newspaper. And the newspapers would come out and take pictures. And back then I was doing things with razor blades and I was doing things with fire. And so they'd come take pictures of me eating fire, and there'd be a front page story about, Mormon missionary, magic show. And it kind of became a big deal. We wound up doing probably at least 20 shows and a dozen front page newspaper interviews. And then that was my first experience to actually be on the radio, because at the same time I got hit up by this radio guy. He said, "Hey, will you come do a show and talk about Mormons and talk about magic? And people can call in and ask anything they want." So, so I went and did that. And then it actually got popular, and I was doing these shows all over. And so I kind of pushed it and said, "Hey, I'll only do the shows if you'll run like 12 weeks of the LDS commercials on your radio station for free."
Oh, wow.
And so anyway, so it created a buzz, and it kind of changed the whole dynamic. And that was what I got going the second year of my mission. And then when I came off that, I came back to the States, and my dad had already booked a dozen shows at colleges. Wow. And so I came back, we built a whole bunch of props and different magic equipment, and we hit the road. And that's kind of how it started.
So cool. Well, what a unique and creative way to do missionary work, magic, mixing magic with the message. That's awesome. Well, very cool, very interesting. And then on the Diet Center franchises, just diving a little bit more there. So this is kind of like a Weight Watchers, what something like that would be today, where someone comes in and they get a program or something like that.
Right.
So you mentioned $5,000 for the franchise fee. I assume these are retail locations that you operated out of?
Yeah, they're just a small little office, like a chiropractor's office, or that's,
So probably not a very large investment in terms of FF&E or getting, a storefront built out. Did $5,000 pretty much cover everything that you needed to get up and running, or did you have to, put a desk in and chairs?
No, that was just the name, and I wound up getting those, really inexpensive. I was able to flip them because that was in the very early part.
Okay.
But as far as on average, I'd say that the franchise name itself wound up being, $25,000 to $50,000.
Okay.
And then as far as you just need the expenses to set up an office. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it was probably, I would say $30,000, $40,000 to set up an office, and get it all set up. And then your biggest expense was advertising. And back then the world was different. And so what I did is I kind of targeted smaller communities, say 30 to 50,000, where you could go in and you could dominate the media, and they'd have their own newspaper. Mm-hmm. And so you could go in and you could run ads for $500 an ad, and they'd be full page ads and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so, that's what was kind of our specialty. And that's why I think we were so successful, is because we would dominate the media. A lot of people would go into bigger areas, like suburbs of Chicago or whatever, and you just couldn't capture the media because it was too split and too diverse.
Yeah.
But back then in a small town, if you worked with the local paper, you could really have a presence.
Got it. Well, yeah, and you mentioned you had a partner, and I think one thing that's always interesting is capital and financing these things. It sounds like, between FF&E and the franchise fee, $75,000 to $100,000 to get one of these going. How did you guys structure that with your partnership? How did you pay for these things? Did you get loans? It'd be interesting to kind of hear, or was it just snowballing, one after the other, to get up to, it sounds like about 10 that you ended up having.
Yeah. No, it was, we didn't really go out and get any capital. I think initially, my partner, he was able to get like a $10,000 loan from his dad, if I remember right. But other than that, we just kind of piecemealed everything. And, in the beginning, it was by getting those 4 franchises and being able to take them from $5,000 to $25,000, then take the capital from that and use it for a different one.
Yep.
So it was really just rearranging capital perpetually. And then the franchises themselves, I mean, like Diet Center, I think their average Diet Center at the time was seeing about 30 people a day was the model. And our first one fell on its face in Reno, and we had to regroup from that and basically shut that one down. But then we dialed it and we figured it out. And our next one, we were averaging 60 people a day. And then our next one, we were averaging 150 people a day. So we were like 5 times the norm.
Wow.
And so we were able to take the cash flow from those and just keep adding them and just keep going. But we really did it without any financing or anything.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. I've mentioned on the show a couple of times, I opened a Crumble franchise out in Georgia, Crumble Cookies. We were the first one in the state, and it was fine. I think that for us, the ideal situation would have been just to have cash flow, to be able to fund the next one and the next one, the next one. You know, we ended up selling it, but I wanted to ask you, when it came time to exit that, you guys probably had a pretty good cash flow coming in. I mean, was there ever a thought in your mind like, well, why don't I just live off this cash flow from these 10 franchises and go off to the beach somewhere? You know, why did you end up selling, or what did you end up doing with those franchises?
Well, like I said, I had the franchises, and then I also had that Mako, and there was that interior design store. And so we had all that going, and I kind of found myself back in the same situation that caused me to go down that path in the first place. In other words, they were in 4 different states, and I was going back and forth all the time, and so I was away from my family, and that was the reason I did that was to make that happen. So it was about 1986. I kind of had an epiphany, and I decided I'm just going to sell everything, and just at that point I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I just wanted to go back to simplifying my life. So I sold everything. I had the money from that I wanted to invest, and so I went around and I hit up all the usual suspects, Merrill Lynch, and back then it was Smith Barney and Shearson Lehman, and just kind of chatted with them about what they could do for me with this money, because at that point in time I felt like I could retire as long as I invested it right. And I just didn't have a lot of confidence in what they were telling me. It was kind of like, give us your money, you'll be paying fees, you'll be paying commissions, and over time it'll all work out, hopefully.
Yeah.
And so that took me to, in 86, I decided, okay, I'm just going to do this myself, because I really didn't trust the markets, and I didn't trust buy and hold. And I wasn't willing to take my life savings and my future and just say, I'm going to set it here and just hope it works. And so for better or worse, I started building all these models, and they were just models to, monitor the markets and what's going on in the markets and kind of move you into different sectors and different areas. At the time, Peter Lynch was having a lot of success with the Magellan Fund. And so I was patterning a lot of the things that I was doing based on that they were sector rotation based and moving in and out of the market based. And so that's how I started managing money. And then I guess you fast forward into 87. So it was like August of 87. And the models that I had built and put together were all telling me, there's way more risk than there is reward. There's no point being invested. And so I came out of the markets in about mid-August and just kind of sat on the sidelines. And then, because I didn't feel good about the market, I had no idea what was going to happen. I just didn't like the ratios and the way they were. So you fast forward into like October of 87, October 19th, and the market drops 20% in a day. And I was completely in cash. And so that felt really good.
Yeah, no kidding. That's awesome.
And so from there, I just kept following the models and just started to allocate back into the markets, as we evolved out of that situation. But and so everything I've always done has been, it's diversification by objectives as opposed to asset classes. I've just done a lot of things non-traditionally in terms of how I manage the money and how we do it now. So anyway.
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, to decide to, hey, I'm gonna take the reins on my own financial future and bet on yourself and manage it yourself is, I mean, not everyone has the gumption to do that. So that's great. And then the timing, was it Friday or Monday? It
was Monday.
Monday, They call it Black Monday, right? That when the 20% down, I think that's what, at least I think it was. But yeah, great timing on your part. So So that was kind of the early days of Paragon then, right? Or you were doing it for yourself. Did that then, transition? Did you start opening up the doors to other people? How did you go from managing your own wealth to kind of getting Paragon and the idea of that off the ground?
Yeah, well, when I started, like I said, I was just managing my own money, and I was perfectly happy doing that. So it was just me and an assistant. And then it was after the crash. That's when everybody was discombobulated. I remember I had this one client, because I only had a few clients back then, and then my own money. But I had this one client that was he was an ex-Geneva steel guy, and I'd actually gone hunting that weekend of the crash, and so he couldn't get a hold of me. And so when I got back, I had all these messages on my phone machine. I mean, just repeated. He was calling, and so I call him back, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? My retirement's wrecked. My wife's going to kill me. I should have never done this, da 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 da." And I said, "You're fine. We were in cash." And he just keeps going on, about, "Oh, the world's ended, da da da." I said, "Bill, you were in cash." And I said it 3 times, and he kept going. And finally he goes, "What does that mean, we were in cash?" I said, "You weren't in the market.
Yeah.
You didn't lose anything." And he's like, "Oh my gosh, if I could jump through the phone and kiss you, I would right now."
Yeah, no kidding.
Anyway, he was very excited. But it was after that, I mean, I had no idea the market was going to drop 20% in a day. That just is what happened, but I did know the market was not okay and it wasn't healthy. And so anyway, after that, I had people just start to hit me up, just, local people, successful people. And but I didn't push it. I didn't market it. I didn't really care. It was more, for me, it was more of a lifestyle business. I was just managing my money. And then, these other people wanted help, kind of thing. And so that went on because back then they didn't really have an RA industry. There weren't registered investment advisors acting the way that we were, where you're managing individual money. Pretty much everything was commission based back then. I mean, I had these people hitting me up to manage their money, and there were no forms. We had the accounts at Fidelity initially, and so we had to draft our own limited power of attorneys and our own this and that, and work with Fidelity, and everything was done over the phone call. It wasn't online. So anyway, we did that, and then you fast forward to 1993, a few years later, and by then I had, I don't know what the number was, probably 20 or 25 families who had hit me up, and so we're managing money, and it's kind of turning into a business. And so at that point, I had to get registered with the SEC and as an investment advisor. And back in the day, I remember I had like the main people from Charles Schwab came out to meet with me because they were trying to figure it out too, exactly what it looked like as far as, the industry.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then from there, it just kind of grew, but I never really marketed or pushed it. It was just, my attitude was, if people want me to manage their money, great. I'm happy to help. If they don't, that's great too. There's a lot of options.
Yeah.
I just really didn't care.
I mean, that's a nice position to be in. I mean, so how old were you when you sold all off the diet franchises and some of these other companies and had that exit, roughly?
That's a good question. Well, it was when I sold all that was 1986. I was born in 56. So I must have been 30.
30.
Yeah.
So you're very young. You're kind of like, I sail off into the sunset. I'm going to manage my own money, and then naturally. I mean, yeah, I think as a client, it'd be attractive to know that you're not looking to. You don't have to do this. You're welcoming it as a friend or colleague of somebody to help manage their wealth. And so, at what point did you decide? It sounds like when you had 25 clients, it became more of a formalized business. Was there ever a point where you said, "Okay, well, I guess this is the next phase of my life. Paragon is going to be kind of I guess what will be the big part of your legacy." And then did you ever kind of turn up the flame and say, we want to grow this thing and be strategic and really start bringing in clients? Or has it always just kind of been a natural evolution of, you can manage your money if you'd like. If not, that's all good. What's that been like for you?
Yeah, no, it's always been just kind of an organic, I've had different numbers of staff over the years. I mean, we've had as many as 10 people working there. But that was more of a function of the models and systems and the technology that we were running to do what we were doing, as opposed to the marketing or any of the rest.
Yeah.
And then that, those numbers are less now because we can do so much with technology.
Sure.
That it's kind of replaced having to have all those people doing all that number crunching.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, it's stayed the same. I did have for a bit my daughter, Shannon, and I can't even remember when this was, but it was after she got out of high school. She went into PR, and she was working for a candle company for everybody. And so she and I were talking one day, and she had seen our website and some of those things, and she just hit me up and said, Dad, I finally figured out what you do. I never really understood, but now I understand what you do. And I've looked at a lot of your data, and I've looked at a lot of your awards and different things and the recognition you've got, but you have a horrible PR presence. You don't have one, basically. And so why don't you hire me, and I'll build you a website and all the rest. And so that must have been in the very beginning of even really the internet getting going, because I said, sure, come on over. And so she worked for me for I'm not even, maybe 3 years. I'm going to get that wrong, and then she's going to be upset with me. But but she worked for us, and I remember she built out a website for us. And I remember it would come up like third in wealth management nationally. And even I was over in Germany one time, and I pulled it up, and we came up like fourth.
Wow.
And so that's how early the internet was and how different it was as far as that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so our focus has always been on the accounts and our systems, our models, and making that work. And one thing you said that is interesting, I think, is the clients that we do have, and there's about 150 families, but those clients know that they're invested exactly the same way I'm invested. So there's not like I'm invested in this and they're invested in that. We're all invested together. I think there's a level of comfort with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and speaking about investment strategy, I saw on your website you have the top flight portfolio, manage income. So when a client approaches you and says, "Hey, Dave, I'd like you to manage, $1 million or $5 million or $10 million," how do you think about that allocation within your guys' system and your process for them?
Yeah, so it really depends. Some people just hit us up and just say, "Hey, I've got my own thing going. I just want you to manage the growth part of my portfolio, or a growth part of my portfolio," and we'll do that. We've got great strategies, and those are all encapsulated in Top Flight. More typically, as a client shows up and says, "Hey, I've just retired. I've got this 401k. This is my life savings. How will you manage it for me?" And so I would. The first thing that I do with a client like that is I try and figure out what their risk level is, their risk tolerance, because that's where most people are screwed up, right? Because the bottom line is if you set your risk tolerance too high, you will bail out at the wrong time. And I've seen it over and over. So my first conversation is, what's your risk level? And when markets are good, everybody's risk level is high, they think. And so I'll push it and I'll say, okay, you've got $1 million. How much are you okay at going down? I mean, if the market drops 20%, you're okay. If you just saw $200,000 is gone on your statement, are you okay? Market goes down 300,000, are you okay? If it's down half, are you okay? I try and drill down to at what point they're not okay. And I try and get a really solid answer out of that. And you have to push it because people don't understand what they're okay with. But anyway, usually, so you'll come back and I'll tell them what I mean by okay is you need to not care what the market does. I mean, so you get up, you do your thing, you enjoy your life, you come home, the market drops 1,000 points, who cares? And so I want to build your portfolio so that you just don't care, because I know if you don't care, then you'll stick with it. And by sticking with it, that's the only way you get the long-term returns.
Yeah, that makes sense. And from a structure standpoint and vehicle standpoint, are you guys, so as an RIA, do you have like a Paragon fund, like as a top flight portfolio? Is that in a fund vehicle, or is that just like an ETF that you guys have created, or is it just direct investing into stocks? I guess trying to better understand, are you operating out of funds? Are you just doing custom portfolios for each client? How are you investing on behalf of your clients?
So it's custom. They're all so They're all custom, but they're all similar in terms of, so Top Flight has a specific structure, and Top Flight is made up of 4 portfolios, 4 different strategies. There's a strategy called Fast Movers that's made up of 8 to 12 stocks. It's real aggressive, and it's constantly changing and adapting. So that's like a fourth of Top Flight. And then there's another portfolio called Fundamental 20 that takes the top 20 stocks out of the S&P 500 based on our screens and our criteria, and that's another portfolio. And then there's another portfolio called Liquidity Factor, and that's taking the least liquid stocks in the S&P 500 and then monitoring those and then changing those because they had all different characteristics in the previous 2. And then there's one that's just a momentum play, and that is usually an ETF-based play depending on where the momentum is in the market. So you take those 4 portfolios, and they make up, there's probably 40 stocks in that combination of portfolios, and then an ETF. And essentially that's like just having a life of its own on the growth side. And we're trying to squeeze as much as we can out of the growth side while having levels of protection, right? So that's Top Flight. And then you have over on the other side, you have a similar version of managed income. And managed income is all things conservative. So it's all your conservative sectors, it's all your bonds, real estate, different areas. So we're tracking all those sectors of the market on the conservative side. But managed income has a mandate of that side of the portfolio is to preserve capital, number one, and then get the most we can in that structure. Whereas Top Flight is kind of going pedal to the metal, and with the idea that, okay, if it goes down, it's going to come back faster. So usually, say if it got body slammed like in 2008 or something, and the whole market takes 4 years to come back, it will probably come back in a couple of years just because it's dialed that way. And so you got your managed income, your Top Flight, and if you as a client are telling me, you want to keep your account limited to going down to no more than 20%. Now, obviously, we can't guarantee that, but we're going to structure it so that maybe in that scenario, this is just off the top of my head, but you might have 65% of that portfolio might be in Top Flight, and then 35% might be in managed income. And so managed income is acting as this hedge to control Top Flight's downside. And then that's really how we control, the volatility and the downside. And we continue on with the goal of trying to keep you invested for long term, because long term Top Flight's numbers are outstanding, so we know if you stick with it, you can get those returns.
Yeah, that makes sense. And are these portfolios or investment strategies available on like a platform? Do you guys use Schwab? Is that who you use to house?
Yeah.
Or TD Ameritrade, or
Schwab just bought TD.
Yeah,
so
they merged. So
yeah.
If I'm a retail investor, I don't know if these are like mutual funds or maybe they're not that size, but could I look up like, a Top Flight, Paragon, or see kind of the performance or see what you guys have done historically?
No, they're separately managed accounts.
Okay.
So we would open accounts for you at Schwab.
Yep.
And there would be, a managed income based account, a Top Flight account, and then we're actively managing that. And then if you look at our 150 clients, 400 accounts or whatever, across all those accounts, when we make a trade in Top Flight, it's going across all those individual accounts.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. When you guys, as a registered investment advisor, I know you have a fiduciary duty to do what's right for your client and act in their best interest.
Right.
How are you thinking about fees and making sure your clients feel like they're getting a good return for what they're paying Paragon for? How have you guys thought about that over time?
Yeah, no, we haven't really changed much in forever. As far as, we don't sell any commission-based products. We don't have any. We're purely a fee-based RIA. Or not fee-based, we're fee-only. I guess fee-based is a combo of both, but we're the true fee-only.
Yeah, got it.
In the beginning. And as far as, the way our fee goes, our fee is, it's different because we have different things. But I would say generally it's, around 1.8, 1.5 for the first $500,000, and then it goes down to 1.3 3.5, I think, and then it goes down to 1. One share over $2 million. And so it's a tiered fee. And as far as if it's worth it or not, because I've had people say, well, these guys charge 0.8, and it's like, okay, well, that's great. But what's the net return? And what I encourage people to do is look at the net returns of their investment advisor. And we've always reported our net. And a lot of people, most people don't report anything.
Sure.
And then a few will report gross, but very few report net. But that's the way we've done it for, 25, 30 years. And so the point is at the end of the day, it really isn't about what it costs. It's about what you get. Because if you're paying a low fee and you're getting a low return, then who cares?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's the right way to think about it. In terms of raising capital or bringing clients in, it sounds like it's been mostly organic, right?
Right.
There's not like a huge push, it sounds like, to go out and advertise and bring in clients. But when you do have those conversations, when someone's sitting across the desk from you, what has helped you guys be successful in bringing clients in the door? Whether it's selling yourself or how are you getting in front of new clients? I always like to ask investment managers about their strategy and success for bringing dollars in the door.
Yeah, like you say, that has never been our strength. Our strength's been on the money management side, and I'd compare our returns with anybody out there, especially our net returns and risk-adjusted returns for that matter. But as far as it's usually just people, somebody knows somebody and we're managing their money, and so they tell their friend, and this other friend comes. So it's not really a hard sell because they're kind of endorsing in a way what we've been doing for them, and then we're just explaining what we do and how we do it. Yeah. So
that's the most powerful way. I think referrals and that building that trust factor is really important. Well, transitioning a little bit to your political side, we mentioned it earlier on, but you are the mayor of Orem City, which is very interesting. Why politics? So it sounds like you're coming up on 2 years in this role. Why transition to politics? What created that desire for you?
I wouldn't say it was a desire. Essentially, going into the election, about 2.5 years ago, I'd been involved in city politics as far as more in the background, just trying to keep things going. And so I had several people on the city council that were on the current city council come and approach me and just say, hey, Orem's going in this direction. It's going down a path of a lot of high density. It's kind of changing the whole dynamic of Orem. And unless somebody else runs, it's just going to get worse kind of thing. And so they hit me up, and I told them I had zero interest in running because I did. I mean, my life was good. At the time, I was 65, and I just didn't see a reason to complicate my life with that. And so anyway, so I told them no. And that was about 3 months before the election. And then about a week before the election, they came back and they said no one else has filed except for one person. And we know what that means. And so would you, reconsider? And I told them no again. But then that time, it just kind of started eating at me. And I thought, my wife says we're going to live in Orem forever. So we might as well,
yeah,
we're not moving.
Yeah.
And I've got the capability to do what needs to be done. I know how to make it happen. And so with that kind of comes responsibility to do something about it. And because I'd always heard of these people complaining about this, complaining about that. And I thought, unless you can do something, just stop talking,
Yep.
do something. And so I kind of took that myself. But anyway, long story short, for probably the next 4 days, I just had really strong feelings that I should run, even though I really didn't want to, and I had no desire to do it. And so one by one, I kind of picked off my kids and asked them what they thought. And, most of them were like, are you kidding? Why would you do this? And then I told my wife I was thinking seriously about it. And she was like, really? Seriously? So anyway, so it was not a thing all the way around. And then we got to, like a couple of days before I finally just decided I'm going to do this. And at that point in time, I didn't think there was a chance that I could win, because the guy that I would be going against had been a former mayor, and he had great name recognition, and he was known throughout the community type thing, and I was pretty much unknown in that sphere. And so I thought, at least we'll get the voice out of these things that need to be fixed in Orem. That will get out, and maybe that's what this campaign will be, is just creating awareness and changing the tide of where things are going. And so anyway, I wound up signing up on the last hour of the last day that you could sign up. And then we kind of jumped into this whirlwind of a campaign. And in the beginning, like I say, I made it through the primary. And it was just me and the other fellow. And at that point, when I made it through the primary, and kind of my competitive juices kind of kicked in. I'm like, there's a shot here. And because the way it went down, it was he had 41%, I had like 30%, and the guy behind me had like 26% or something. Those numbers are probably off. And so anyway, I just kind of jumped in and went for it, and we wound up getting right at 60% of the vote. So it was a major swing.
Yeah. Wow.
So anyway.
Well, good for you. Congratulations. That's amazing. I think, my opinion, I think, yeah, some of the best politicians are those who either aren't seeking after it, and people are kind of pulling them in based off of your track record and your reputation, and are not politicians by nature, I guess. So, well, what are maybe one or two things that you focused on during your when you were running for mayor, or that you're focusing on now that you're trying to implement in the city of Orem?
Yeah, we've actually done a ton. As far as, when you talk to the other city council members on the city council right now, they'll tell you that we've done more in the last 2 years than was done in the previous 10.
Wow.
And the reason for that is we took back, essentially the mayor and city council were more ceremonial most of the time, and the city management just kind of ran things and focused on, made the focus of where we're going. And so one of the first things I did was I decided we're going to take back the legislative power of the mayor and city council. They are the ones who are elected by the people, and they're the ones that represent the community, and they should be driving the ship as far as where it's going. And, there was a fair amount of pushback on that. And so we had to rearrange, structures over the city and everything else. But currently we are the legislative body, and we are driving the ship. And so we've done a lot of things. One of the first things we did, we had to do it in the first 5 weeks we were in, was there was a program called State Street Master Plan, and that State Street Master Plan was set in place. There were supposed to be 10,000 apartments built on State Street in Orem. And we'd already had about almost 5,000 in the previous 10 years throughout the city, but these were going to be 10,000 just on State Street. And so the majority of the citizens didn't want that huge change in a family, neighborhood, kind of a community, to have that huge change towards a downtown Salt Lake kind of approach. And so anyway, we got that reversed in the first 5 weeks, and that whole State Street Master Plan has been completely changed to where it's mostly service, retail, and office up and down State Street. We passed a resolution on all your parks and schools, because we had situations where schools were being shut down, and we want to protect those properties from being developed into something else. So we did a green space initiative where all that has to stay green space or be redeveloped in something similar. So if a school shuts down, it has to be a charter school or something different. So
got it.
Anyway, so the green space initiative, we put a big focus on. There's a lot of outside pressures coming into Orem and everywhere else. And so we kind of put a renewed focus, a major focus on family. Orem's always been Family City USA, but we took it to a whole new level in terms of it's on the trucks, it's on the flag, it's on all the city buildings, and it's constantly talked about. And more importantly, it's the benchmark that we measure all of our legislative decisions against. Does this help make us more Family City USA or less Family City USA? And it has to be more Family City USA for us to pass that resolution. We also just passed a resolution, In God We Trust. We're the second city in Utah to ever do that. And that's just to kind of drive a stake in the ground and say, we believe in God, and that's who we are, and that's what drives us. And then we're doing a freedom park. So kind of the principles of God, family, country, we're embedding those as core values in Orem going forward.
Yeah, love that. That's great. Well, good for you, Dave. That's amazing. Sounds like a ton of accomplishment in a very, very short time period. Well, last couple things I want to touch on your book. So I think you have a copy here. Would love to hear about what you're writing here and when it's coming out, and little preview for everyone.
Sure. Yeah, so it's called Hunting for True Wealth. And what I'm trying to do with Hunting for True Wealth is I've always been really involved in the outdoors, and I added it up one time, and I've probably spent at least 1,000 nights out in the backcountry somewhere. Wow. And that's camping, backpacking, but then a lot of extreme hunting too. And so I've hunted up in British Columbia and the Yukon and Africa and half a dozen Western states. And in those hunts, there's a lot of life lessons, and there's actually a lot of investment lessons too. I mean, like patience is critical for hunting; it's critical for investing. And so what I tried to do in this book was I took these hunting stories because I've been told they're pretty entertaining. I think they're pretty entertaining, but I'm biased, right? By taking these hunting stories, and there's probably a dozen of them in this book. And then I've taken building wealth, which is what we do at Paragon. So that's financial wealth. And then as I thought more about it, I thought, well, what is true wealth? Because I've seen a lot of clients over the years who get focused on building financial wealth, and it kind of comes at the expense of true wealth and just happiness and a fulfilling life and all that sort of thing. And so there's a section of the book that talks about what is true wealth and how do you build true wealth. So it's really taking those three things, but it's hunting, financial wealth, and true wealth, and packaging them in one book. So
love that. Yeah, sounds really interesting, and I love the idea of true wealth. It's something that gets talked a lot about on this podcast. Is what is the purpose of life? What really makes people happy? Because a lot of people who sit across from me on the show have monetary success and trying to dig a little deeper. So it sounds like that. And when is the book coming out?
It should come out probably the second or third week of January.
Okay, great. That's awesome. And how will it be available for people to access? Amazon or
it'll be on Amazon. It'll be on some other publishing platforms too, but Amazon for sure.
Okay, that's great. Well, last couple of questions, Dave. We'll wrap up here. Just in terms of advice, I mean, you have been extremely successful, very entrepreneurial, especially in your early days. I guess what would be one piece of advice that you'd have for somebody who wants to start their own business or be an entrepreneur? Anything that you could take from your prior experience that would be really great to share.
I mean, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you've got to be real committed to make it happen no matter what. And there's really no such thing as failure as there is. It's just repositioning and moving forward. And so an entrepreneur has a whole different mindset. A lot of people might get to a spot and just say, oh, that didn't work, I'm out. An entrepreneur keeps going and going. And they might have to change to a new plan, a different product, a different whatever, but they keep moving forward with all the experience they've learned so far. So it's a different mindset, I think, because there's a lot of really talented people that, for whatever reason, don't go down the entrepreneur path. It's just not comfortable.
Yeah, I love that.
But there's that, and then my other piece of advice just would be to always do the right thing for the right reason. A lot of times people, they're not true to themselves. And I think you've got to be true to yourself and do the right thing for the right reason. I think if you do that and you keep your focus on that, everything else will work out.
It's great advice. And speaking of true wealth, and this is something I ask most of my guests, is when you think about success in life, or I guess using your term, true wealth, how do you define that in your life, Dave?
I define that as you know who you are, and you're true to who you are, and you do everything you can to make the world a better place in all the spheres that you can touch it throughout your life. That's how I define it.
Love it. That's great. Well, no better way to end, Dave. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing the insights and a little bit more about yourself. This has been really insightful and very interesting. So thank you for your time.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course. Awesome. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks, Dave. That was great. Loved hearing your story and everything about it. It's great. And excited for your book. Congrats on getting that done. I know writing a book is not an easy feat. What was that like? Right? I mean, writing a book. Is that pretty crazy or?
Yeah, it was insanity. It was, so there's a girl that's been a client of mine for 25 years and she's a writer and she's been bugging me because she knows a lot of the stories. You know, I mean, we've just talked about different ones over the years and she's been bugging me for the last 10 years, you know, that I need to write a book and there's just too much good material, she says.
Yeah.
And she's a writer, right? So she convinced me basically to spend like an hour to an hour and a half a week with her for a year. Mm-hmm. And then I would just she would ask me all kinds of questions. And then she's basically taken all that and encapsulated it into the book. And then I've had to go back through and edit it and fix it and adjust it and all the rest. But yeah, no, it's, well, she hit me pretty hard about a year and a half ago. She said, okay, I'm tired of telling you this, and I know your life is getting worse because you just got elected mayor, and so now you've always told me you're too busy, but now you're like ridiculous. And she said, if you don't do it, then that's all just going to disappear. Your grandkids won't know about it. Nobody will know about it.
Yeah.
And it will just go in the wind. And so I said, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Then I told my wife, and my wife's like, are you kidding? You're insane.
Oh man, that's good. Well, that's awesome. I do think, yeah, having a book is a good way, yeah, to help your legacy and your grandkids. And I wish, my grandpa had a book or grandma, and it'd be really interesting to read that. So
yeah,
that's cool.
That was my main motivation, was just a family thing. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it actually turned out pretty darn good.
I'm sure it did.
I mean, it was way past my expectations.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing. That's great.